Last Thanksgiving, my father stood at the head of our mahogany dining table, crystal wine glass raised high, and delivered what he called his annual gratitude speech. He praised Michael's promotion to senior partner at his Manhattan law firm, celebrated Jessica's latest campaign for a luxury watch brand that had gone viral, and then his eyes found me. The pause stretched long enough for everyone to shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "And Sarah? Well, she keeps our rental properties running smoothly." The table erupted in polite laughter, the kind reserved for someone's quirky hobby. I smiled and nodded because that's what you do when your family sees you as the help rather than an equal. Tonight, I sat in that same chair, wearing the same navy cardigan I'd worn to every family gathering for the past 3 years, driving the same weathered Honda Civic that Michael once joked belonged in a junkyard. Nothing about my appearance suggested I'd changed, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Because while they spent the last 5 years planning their futures around Dad's inheritance and arguing over who deserved what piece of our family's legacy, I had quietly been building my own empire, one forgotten property at a time. The Victorian house they were about to fight over, the one that held all of Grandma Rose's memories and their childhood dreams, I'd owned it for 3 years. But they didn't know that yet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the youngest, Mitchell meant living in the shadow of expectations I could never meet. Michael had been groomed for greatness from the moment he could spell Harvard. By age 10, he was winning state debate competitions. At 16, he was interning for federal judges. When he graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Law and landed a position at Williams & Associates, the most prestigious firm in Manhattan, my parents threw a celebration party that the Riverside Country Club still talks about. Michael spoke their language fluently. Success, prestige, and the kind of achievements that looked impressive on Christmas cards. Then came Jessica, the golden middle child who turned everything she touched into social media gold. Beautiful, charming, and possessed of an instinct for trends that seemed almost supernatural, she transformed herself into exactly what modern success looked like. Her Instagram account showcasing luxury lifestyle marketing had 500,000 followers. When she landed the creative director position at Sterling & Associates, handling campaigns for brands that celebrities fought to wear, Mom started introducing her as, quote, our daughter who works with the stars. Jessica had mastered the art of making everything look effortless while working harder than anyone realized. And then there was me, Sarah, the one who spent summer afternoons in Grandma Rose's basement workshop, learning to rewire lamps and fix leaky faucets instead of practicing piano or perfecting my tennis serve. While Michael studied constitutional law and Jessica curated her personal brand, I was fascinated by blueprints and floor plans. By the way, old houses held stories in their bones. When I announced I wanted to study construction management and real estate development at the State University instead of following them to Ivy League schools, the dinner table went silent. Mom actually put down her fork. Construction? Dad had asked, the word hanging in the air like something distasteful. Sarah, that's not really a career for someone from our family. Mom tried to soften it with her practiced smile. Sweetheart, maybe you could consider architecture? That's more refined. But I wasn't interested in drawing pretty buildings for other people to construct. I wanted to understand how things worked, how to take something broken and make it whole again. I wanted to get my hands dirty in a way that horrified my mother and bewildered my father. When I graduated with a degree in property management and immediately took a job as an assistant manager at Riverside Gardens Apartments, a modest complex on the less fashionable side of town, I could practically feel their disappointment radiating across the dinner table at family gatherings. She manages apartments, became Mom's standard introduction, delivered with the same tone she might use to explain an unfortunate medical condition. It's very hands-on work. What they didn't understand, what they never bothered to ask about, was that managing those apartments taught me everything about real estate that no textbook could. I learned about cash flow and maintenance costs, about tenant relations and property values. I discovered which neighborhoods were overlooked gems and which gleaming developments were built on shaky foundations. Most importantly, I learned to see potential where others saw problems. Every family gathering followed the same script. We'd convene at my parents' sprawling colonial house in the most prestigious part of Riverside, the kind of place that had been featured in architectural magazines and hosted charity luncheons. The house sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, with gardens that required a full-time landscaping crew and a circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen luxury cars. Walking through those mahogany doors always felt like entering a museum dedicated to the Mitchell family's success story. The walls were lined with photographs documenting our achievements. Michael receiving various legal awards, Jessica at glamorous industry events, family portraits taken at the country club. There were exactly 3 photos of me, all from childhood, before I'd started disappointing them with my unconventional choices. The message was clear without being spoken. This house was a shrine to a certain kind of success, and I didn't qualify for membership. Dinner conversations were performances. Michael would regale us with stories from his latest high-profile cases, dropping names of judges and senators with practiced casualness. Jessica would show us her phone, scrolling through comments on her latest campaign or sharing gossip from industry parties where she rubbed shoulders with people whose names appeared in tabloids. The spotlight would inevitably turn to me, and someone would ask about my work with the kind of polite interest reserved for unpleasant topics. "Still managing those apartments, Sarah?" Uncle Jim would ask, swirling his wine with genuine curiosity. He was the only family member who seemed to actually listen to my answers. "Among other things," I'd reply carefully. "I've been working on some restoration projects, too." But before I could elaborate, someone would change the subject, or Dad would launch into a story about his banking days. They weren't being cruel, exactly. They simply couldn't conceive that what I did mattered in any meaningful way. In their world, success meant corner offices and magazine features, not knowing how to restore original hardwood floors or understanding the intricacies of historic building codes. The turning point came 5 years ago when Grandma Rose passed away. She'd been my ally in the family, the one person who understood my fascination with fixing things and creating beauty from forgotten places. Her Victorian house on Elm Street had been my sanctuary growing up, a place where I could spend hours in her workshop learning to use proper tools, listening to stories about the craftsmanship that went into every hand-carved banister and original stained glass window. When the family gathered to discuss her estate, the Victorian house became a problem nobody wanted to solve. Built in 1892, it needed significant work. New plumbing, electrical updates, foundation repairs, and a roof that had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. The estimated renovation costs ran into 6 figures, and none of my siblings had the time, knowledge, or inclination to tackle such a project. "It's a money pit," Michael declared during the estate meeting. "We should sell it as is and split the proceeds. The location isn't even that desirable anymore," Jessica added, scrolling through her phone. "That whole neighborhood has gotten so working class." Mom sighed dramatically. "I hate to see it go, but maintaining 2 houses is just impractical. And honestly, none of us has the expertise to manage that kind of renovation." I sat quietly at the edge of the conversation, watching my family prepare to auction off the place that had shaped my understanding of what homes could be. The Victorian house wasn't just a building to me. It was a masterpiece of 19th century craftsmanship, with original crown molding, working fireplaces in every room, and a wraparound porch that had hosted 3 generations of family gatherings. Under all that deferred maintenance was a treasure waiting to be restored. When I quietly offered to buy the house from the estate at fair market value, they practically sighed with relief. Dad handled the paperwork with the same brisk efficiency he'd once brought to banking, treating it as a simple transaction that solved everyone's problems. Michael was already calculating his portion of the proceeds before the papers were signed. Jessica was pleased that she wouldn't have to deal with contractors and renovation headaches. Mom seemed relieved that someone in the family would keep the house, even if that someone was me. "Just don't get in over your head, sweetheart," she warned as I signed the final documents. Old houses can be very expensive to maintain. What none of them realized was that I'd been preparing for this moment for years. Every evening and weekend I'd spent learning from contractors. Every course I'd taken in historic preservation. Every connection I'd made with local craftsmen and suppliers. had been building toward this opportunity. I didn't just want to own Grandma Rose's house, I wanted to restore it to its original glory, while making it a home where real families could afford to live. The work began immediately. I moved into the small apartment above Henderson's hardware store downtown, renting it for next to nothing in exchange for helping old Mr. Henderson with his bookkeeping and inventory management. Every morning before my regular job, and every evening until well past dark, I worked on the Victorian house. I learned to repair plaster walls by watching YouTube videos and consulting with master craftsmen who remembered when such work was done by hand. I sourced original fixtures from architectural salvage yards and spent weekends stripping layers of paint from intricate woodwork that previous owners had thoughtlessly covered. The transformation was slow, but magical. Room by room, the house revealed its secrets. Behind modern drywall, I discovered original brick walls. Under linoleum flooring, there were wide plank oak floors that gleamed like honey when properly restored. The stained glass window in the front hall, which everyone had assumed was beyond repair, needed only careful cleaning and minor lead work to shine like a jewel again. But I wasn't just restoring one house. The skills I developed, the contractors I worked with, and the understanding I gained of the local real estate market opened up opportunities I'd never imagined. While my family thought I was playing with an old house like an expensive hobby, I was actually building relationships and expertise that would become the foundation of something much larger. Marcus Rodriguez, a master carpenter who'd helped me with the Victorian's most challenging restoration work, became my business partner. We started buying other neglected properties in the neighborhood, houses that investors overlooked because they required the kind of patient, skilled work that most people weren't willing to do. One by one, we brought them back to life, creating beautiful, affordable homes in a part of town that had been written off as too much trouble. The bank that initially seemed skeptical of my loan applications started seeking my advice on properties they were considering for foreclosure. Local contractors began referring clients to me when they encountered projects that required both vision and expertise. The City Planning Commission asked me to consult on historic district preservation guidelines. Without making any announcements or seeking recognition, I was becoming someone who mattered in Riverside's real estate community. Meanwhile, at family gatherings, I remained the same quietly unremarkable daughter who managed apartments and played with old houses. When relatives asked about my work, I'd mention helping with some renovation projects or assisting property owners with maintenance issues. Nobody probed deeper, and I didn't volunteer information. It was easier to let them maintain their comfortable assumptions than to try to explain how rewarding it was to save a piece of architectural history while creating affordable housing for working families. The Victorian House project took 3 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Years to complete. But when it was finished, it was magnificent. Every original detail had been preserved or carefully replicated. The modern amenities were seamlessly integrated without compromising the home's historic character. The wraparound porch where Grandma Rose used to serve lemonade on summer afternoons looked exactly as it had in old family photographs, but now it was structurally sound and properly maintained. I could have moved into the house myself. After all, I owned it free and clear, and it was more beautiful than anywhere I'd ever lived. But that wasn't the point. Instead, I found a young family who appreciated the craftsmanship and history, who promised to love the house the way Grandma Rose had loved it. Their monthly rent covered my costs while building equity in a property that had tripled in value since I'd purchased it from the estate. By the time Dad called this latest family meeting to discuss important estate planning matters, I owned 12 properties in Riverside. Some were elegant restored Victorians, like Grandma Rose's house. Others were modest two-family homes that provided affordable housing while generating steady rental income. A few were commercial properties that I'd converted into artist studios and small business spaces. My property management company employed 8 people, including Marcus and 3 other craftsmen who specialized in historic preservation. But none of my family knew any of this. To them, I was still just Sarah, the daughter who'd chosen a practical career over prestige, who drove an old car and lived in a small apartment, and seemed content with a simple life. They had no idea that my property portfolio was worth more than Michael's Manhattan Co-op and Jessica's trendy loft combined. They didn't know that I'd been featured in Preservation magazine for my work saving historic houses. or that the mayor had asked me to serve on the city's affordable housing task force. Tonight's family gathering had been called because Dad was finally ready to discuss his will and the distribution of family assets. At 72, he'd remained remarkably healthy, but Mom had been pressing him to formalize their estate planning. The family home, his investment accounts, and various other properties would need to be divided among his children, and he wanted to discuss his intentions openly to avoid surprises later. I drove my Honda Civic through the familiar gates of the family estate, parking behind Michael's black BMW and Jessica's white Mercedes. The contrast was deliberate on my part. If they saw me as the modest daughter who'd chosen a simpler path, I was happy to maintain that illusion a little longer. Because tonight, I suspected, would be the night when comfortable assumptions finally collided with inconvenient realities. Walking up the stone steps to the front door, I could hear laughter and conversation from the dining room. They were already gathered, already settling into their familiar roles for another performance of family dinner. But this time, I had a feeling the script was about to change, in ways none of us expected. The mahogany doors opened to reveal the same elegant foyer I'd known all my life, with its crystal chandelier and oil paintings of ancestors who'd built the Mitchell family fortune through banking and real estate investments. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was the only one who'd actually followed in their entrepreneurial footsteps, even if my family couldn't see it yet. As I hung my cardigan on the antique coat rack and smoothed my simple black dress, I could hear Dad's voice from the dining room, discussing portfolio diversification with Michael, while Jessica showed Mom something on her phone. Soon they'd be discussing the future of family properties and inheritance planning, making decisions based on assumptions that were about to be thoroughly challenged. I took a deep breath and walked toward the dining room, ready for the conversation that would finally reveal who I'd really become while they weren't paying attention. Dinner unfolded with the predictable rhythm of a well-rehearsed symphony. We gathered around the polished table that had hosted 3 generations of Mitchell family meals, each place setting arranged with military precision. The crystal glasses caught the light from the antique chandelier, casting tiny rainbows across the white linen tablecloth. Everything about the scene spoke of permanence, tradition, and the kind of understated wealth that never needed to announce itself. Dad presided from his traditional seat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled despite his 72 years. Mom sat opposite him, elegant in a way that suggested decades of practice at being the perfect banker's wife. Michael had positioned himself to Dad's right, already leaning forward with the focused attention he brought to important legal matters. Jessica sat beside Mom, her phone face down on the table in a rare display of complete presence. The conversation began with safe territory. Michael discussed a corporate merger case that had made headlines in the financial press. Jessica shared details about her latest campaign for a Swiss watch company, complete with behind-the-scenes stories about working with a temperamental celebrity endorser. Dad nodded approvingly at their achievements, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated his genuine interest in their careers. When the spotlight inevitably turned to me, I offered my standard update about apartment maintenance and tenant relations. Mrs. Henderson in 4B finally agreed to let me update her kitchen, I said, cutting into my salmon. The original cabinets were from 1978, and the dishwasher had been broken for 6 months. That's nice, dear, Mom replied with practiced enthusiasm. It's so important to keep rental properties well maintained. Michael chuckled. I don't know how you have the patience for that, Sarah. Dealing with tenants all day would drive me insane. Someone has to do it, I said simply, which earned approving nods around the table. They liked this version of me. Practical, self-deprecating, content with humble work that kept the world running smoothly, while more important people handled more important things. As the main course was cleared and dessert served, Dad's demeanor shifted. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care and looked around the table, making eye contact with each of us in turn. I wanted to talk with you all tonight about something important, he began, his voice taking on the formal tone he'd once used for board meetings. Your mother and I have been working with the estate attorney to finalize our will, and we thought it was time to discuss our intentions openly. The energy at the table immediately intensified. Michael straightened in his chair, his lawyer instincts engaging. Jessica set down her spoon and gave Dad her complete attention. I continued eating my creme brulee, but every nerve in my body was alert. First, Let me say that we're very proud of all three of you, Dad continued. You've each found your path and built successful lives, though those paths have been quite different. His eyes lingered on me for a moment before continuing. However, as we've considered how to distribute our assets, we've had to make some practical decisions based on each of your circumstances and demonstrated ability to manage significant financial responsibilities. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. I could feel the familiar pattern emerging, the careful language that would somehow justify treating me differently while maintaining the fiction that it was for my own good. Michael, Dad said, turning to my brother, your legal expertise and financial acumen make you the natural choice to serve as executor of the estate. Beyond that, we're planning to transfer the majority of our investment portfolio to you, along with the responsibility for managing the family trust. Michael nodded gravely, as if accepting a burden rather than a windfall. I appreciate your confidence, Dad. I promise to handle everything with the care it deserves. Jessica, Dad continued, your creative success and business connections have shown us that you understand how to build and maintain value in competitive markets. We'd like you to inherit the house in Martha's Vineyard, along with the art collection and the furnishings here that have been in our family for generations. Jessica's eyes brightened, though she tried to maintain an appropriately solemn expression. Thank you both. I know how much those pieces mean to our family's history. The pause that followed stretched just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for the careful explanation of why I would be receiving something different, something lesser, something more appropriate to my station in life. Sarah, Dad said finally, his voice gentle but firm. We've thought carefully about your situation. Your work in property management has been admirable, and we know you've found fulfillment in that career path. However, given your more modest circumstances and, frankly, your lack of experience managing significant assets, we've decided it would be best to establish a smaller trust fund that will provide you with steady income without the burden of major financial decisions. He paused, perhaps waiting for me to thank him for this consideration. When I didn't respond, he continued, we're also planning to give you first right of refusal on purchasing Grandma Rose's old house should you ever want to move out of that apartment and into something with more space. The irony hit me like a physical blow. They were offering me the chance to buy the house I already owned, the house I'd lovingly restored from near ruin while they forgot it existed, the house that was currently home to the Morales family, whose children played in the same backyard where I'd learned to use a hammer under Grandma Rose's patient guidance. Michael cleared his throat diplomatically. Dad, I think that's very thoughtful. Sarah has always loved that old house. It would be perfect for her, Jessica added, much more suitable than that tiny apartment above the hardware store. Mom reached across the table to pat my hand. We just want what's best for you, sweetheart. Sometimes people need different kinds of security at different stages of life. I looked around the table at their faces, seeing the same mixture of pity and self-satisfaction I'd been reading there for years. They were proud of themselves for being so considerate, so thoughtful about my limitations. They'd found a way to exclude me from the real family wealth, while convincing themselves they were protecting me from responsibilities I couldn't handle. I see, I said quietly, setting down my spoon. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. Michael gets the investment portfolio and the primary house. Jessica gets the vacation property and the family heirlooms. And I get a small allowance and the opportunity to buy a house that needs significant renovation work. Dad's expression softened, as if he was dealing with a disappointed child. Sarah, it's not about the money. It's about responsibility and capability. Michael has spent his career managing complex financial matters. Jessica has proven she can handle valuable assets and make them more valuable. He paused, searching for diplomatic language. You work very hard, but you've chosen a simpler path. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does inform our decision-making. Plus, Mom added helpfully, that old Victorian really is a labor of love. It would give you a wonderful project to work on, something to really make your own. The weight of their misunderstanding pressed against my chest like a physical thing. For 5 years, I'd listened to these conversations, accepted their assumptions, played the role they'd assigned me. But tonight, sitting in their elegant dining room while they casually dismissed my capabilities and offered me crumbs from a table I could have bought outright, something inside me finally snapped. My phone, which had been silent all evening, suddenly buzzed against my leg. Then again. And again. I glanced down to see Marcus's name on the screen, along with a text that made my heart race. Emergency at Elm Street. Water main break flooded the basement. Need your authorization for emergency repairs. The Victorian house. My house. The house they were offering me the privilege of purchasing. I stood up slowly, phone in hand. Excuse me for just a moment. I need to take this call. Dad frowned. Sarah, we're in the middle of an important family discussion. This is important too, I said, already moving toward the doorway. I'll just be a minute. I walked into the hallway and answered the call, but I didn't step far enough away to prevent my voice from carrying back to the dining room. Marcus's voice was tense with concern. Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late, but we've got a real problem here. The city's water main break sent water straight into the basement of the Elm Street property. I've got the emergency crew here, but they need authorization from the owner to start the repairs immediately. How bad is it? I asked, my voice professional and decisive. Could be 15 grand in damage if we don't act fast. The good news is insurance should cover most of it, but I need your signature on the emergency work order tonight. Approved, I said without hesitation. Do whatever it takes to protect the structure. I'll be there in 20 minutes to sign the paperwork. Thanks, boss. Sorry to interrupt your family dinner. Don't apologize. The property comes first. I ended the call and turned back toward the dining room, where I could see my family frozen in various states of confusion. Michael was leaning forward, his lawyer brain clearly processing what he'd just heard. Jessica was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Mom and Dad looked like they were trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. I walked back to my seat calmly and picked up my purse. I'm sorry, but I need to leave. There's a problem with one of my properties that requires immediate attention. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Dad found his voice. One of your properties? The Victorian house on Elm Street, I said matter-of-factly. The one you just offered to let me purchase. There's been a water main break that's caused flooding in the basement. My emergency crew is there now, but I need to authorize the repairs personally. Michael's face had gone pale. Sarah, when you say your property, I mean I own it, I said simply. I bought it from Grandma Rose's estate 5 years ago, remember? You all signed the paperwork. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. But we thought. You thought I was playing house, I finished. You thought I was spending my small savings on a hobby project that I'd probably have to sell when I got in over my head. Mom was staring at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. But sweetheart, that house needed so much work. The renovation costs alone were substantial, I agreed. About $140,000, spread over 3 years. But the house is now worth $420,000, and it's been generating rental income for the past 18 months. The numbers hung in the air like smoke. Dad, whose banking background meant he could calculate property values and investment returns in his sleep, was doing rapid mental math. His expression shifted from confusion to something approaching respect. Sarah, he said slowly, are you telling us that you've been running a real estate business? I'm telling you that I own 12 properties in Riverside, including the Victorian house you just offered to sell me, I replied. I also own Mitchell Property Management, which employs 8 people and manages rental properties for 37 other local owners. Additionally, I serve on the city's Historic Preservation Committee and the Affordable Housing Task Force. The silence stretched so long that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Finally, Uncle Jim, who had been quietly observing from the far end of the table, started to laugh. It began as a chuckle but grew into something approaching delight. Robert, he said to my father, your daughter just told you she's built a real estate empire while you weren't paying attention, and you're sitting there looking like she announced she was joining the circus. Dad's face flushed. We had no idea. Because you never asked, I said, not unkindly but firmly. Every time I tried to explain what I was working on, someone changed the subject or suggested I consider something more suitable. Eventually, I stopped trying. Michael found his voice first. Sarah, this is incredible. Why didn't you tell us you were doing so well? When? I asked. When would have been a good time? During the conversation where you called property management a dead-end job? Or maybe when Jessica suggested I consider something with more growth potential? Jessica's face was flushed with embarrassment. I didn't mean, you meant exactly what you said, I interrupted. And that's fine. You all made judgments based on your understanding of what success looks like. I just chose to measure success differently. Mom was still processing, her real estate agent instincts finally engaging. 12 properties, you said? In this market? Mostly historic homes that needed significant restoration work, I explained. The kind of projects that most investors avoid because they require specialized knowledge and patient capital. I found my niche in preservation and affordable housing. Affordable housing, Dad repeated, his tone shifting as the business implications became clear. There are significant tax advantages to that designation. Among other benefits, I agreed. It turns out that doing good work and doing profitable work aren't mutually exclusive. The phone in my hand buzzed again, this time with a text from the Morales family who rented the Victorian house. Sarah, we're so sorry about the basement. The emergency crew was amazing. Thank you for responding so quickly. We were worried we'd have to move out. I showed them the message. The Victorian house isn't just an investment property. It's home to a family who loves it as much as Grandma Rose did. They're a young couple with 2 kids who couldn't afford to live in this neighborhood otherwise. Making sure they have a safe, beautiful home to raise their children in, that feels like the best possible use of Grandma Rose's legacy. The transformation around the table was visible. Michael, who had spent his career dealing with wealthy clients, was beginning to understand the scope of what I'd accomplished. Jessica, whose marketing background meant she understood brand building and market positioning, was realizing that I'd built something substantial while maintaining complete discretion. Mom and Dad were grappling with the reality that their assumptions about my capabilities had been not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. Sarah, Dad said finally, his voice carrying a note of something I'd never heard from him before. It might have been respect. This changes things significantly. We should discuss revising our estate planning to reflect your actual circumstances. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had just spent an hour explaining why I couldn't be trusted with significant financial responsibilities. Does it change things, Dad? Because an hour ago you were convinced I needed protection from complex financial decisions. Now that you know I'm successful, suddenly I'm capable of handling responsibility? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. We were working with incomplete information. You were working with assumptions, I corrected. For 5 years, you had complete access to accurate information. You just never bothered to ask for it. Michael leaned forward, his negotiation instincts kicking in. Look, Sarah, we clearly misjudged the situation. But now that we understand what you've built, we could explore ways to coordinate our investments. Family synergies, shared resources, maybe even bringing you in as a partner on some larger development projects. The offer hung in the air, and I could see the calculation behind it. Now that they knew I was successful, they wanted to be part of that success. The same people who had just excluded me from the family wealth were suddenly interested in including me in their plans. That's very generous, Michael, I said carefully. But I think you misunderstand something fundamental about what I've built. This isn't a hobby that got out of hand, or a lucky accident that needs professional management. This is a deliberate business strategy that I've been executing for 5 years. I don't need partners or coordinators or family synergies. I need what I've always needed, for my family to see me as I actually am instead of as they think I should be. Jessica was twisting her napkin in her hands. Sarah, we were trying to be supportive. You were trying to be comfortable, I said. It was easier to believe I'd chosen a simple life than to consider that I might be building something you didn't understand. You could feel good about yourselves for being protective without having to acknowledge that I might not need protection. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Marcus. I glanced at the screen and then at my family. I really do need to go. There's actual work that needs my attention. I stood up and gathered my purse, noting the way they all watched my movements as if seeing me for the first time. For what it's worth, I'm not angry about the inheritance decisions. I understand that you made them based on your best understanding of the situation. But I won't be accepting the trust fund or the right of refusal on the Victorian house. Dad looks stricken. Sarah, please don't make any hasty decisions. This isn't hasty, I assured him. I've been thinking about it for years, actually. I don't need your financial support, and I can't ethically accept property rights to a house I already own. I paused at the doorway and looked back at them, these people who had shaped my understanding of family and belonging in ways both positive and painful. I love you all, I always have. But love isn't the same thing as understanding, and understanding isn't the same thing as respect. Tonight, for the first time, I think you might actually see me. I hope that's enough to build something better on. As I walked through the familiar hallway toward the front door, I could hear the explosion of conversation behind me. Michael's voice, urgent and analytical. Jessica's questions, rapid fire and bewildered. Mom and Dad, trying to process the reality that their youngest daughter had been living a completely different life than the one they'd imagined for her. I stepped out into the cool Connecticut evening and took a deep breath. The Victorian house was waiting for me, along with Marcus and the emergency crew and the Morales family who depended on me to keep their home safe and beautiful. Tomorrow, there would be insurance calls and contractor meetings and the dozen other responsibilities that came with owning and managing real property. But tonight, for the first time in my adult life, I drove away from a family gathering feeling like myself instead of like the character they'd written for me in their story. I owned the house they'd offered to sell me. I employed more people than some of their prestigious careers. I'd built something that mattered, something that would last, something that made the world a little bit better for families like the one currently waiting for me to solve their basement flooding crisis. The Victorian house glowed warm and welcoming as I pulled into the driveway, its restored porch lights casting golden circles on the walkway where Grandma Rose had once taught me that broken things could be made beautiful again. Marcus was waiting with the paperwork, the emergency crew was already pumping water from the basement, and Mr. Morales was standing in the doorway with the kind of grateful expression that reminded me why I'd chosen this work in the first place. This was my legacy, not inherited wealth or family approval, but homes that sheltered families, neighborhoods that thrived, and the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered. As I signed the authorization for repairs that would cost more than some people made in a year, I realized that I'd finally stopped waiting for my family to understand what I'd built. Their understanding would be nice, but it was no longer necessary. I had built something undeniable, something that existed completely independent of their opinions or approval. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.